So good afternoon and welcome to the presentation of the campaign that the Oklahoma Transit Association has kicked off this month. It's entitled Transit OK Vision 2020. And to give you a start on the background, this campaign was developed jointly by the Advocacy Committee and the Communications and Public Relations Committee, the joint project of both of those groups. It was approved over the last 2 months in different pieces by the board of directors. And of course, now comes the time for implementation of the campaign, which comes to all of us as members of OTA. It is a campaign that will only be successful with the participation and involvement of each of our agencies across the state. As with all grassroots campaigns, the whole becomes much stronger from the pieces, and in this case, the pieces are the important part to this being successful. This campaign was developed based off of the meetings that I have held with all of you across the state in my initial visits. What we heard was almost without exception that the number one issue that OTA should be focusing on from an advocacy perspective is increased funding for each of you and your agencies. And so that loud and clear message came through, and it's the basis for the formation of this campaign through that leadership that I talked about moments ago. So the goals of this campaign have four very specific pieces to them. The goals of Transit OK Vision 2020 are to increase state funding for public transit. It's to ensure the state funding is provided to all segments: urban, small urban, rural, and tribal. We want to make sure that the funding that we get has a dedicated funding source. It is not something just funded out of the state revolving fund. It's at the discretion of the folks at ODOT, but instead there's a dedicated funding source that provides for that increase in the state funding for public transit. And lastly, we also want to make sure that local agencies have the ability to look at different options locally for funding of their transit systems. So we want to make sure that legislation enables you having the ability to look at all the different sources that you may want to look at. Quite frankly, this is probably something that's more important to the large systems than it is to the small rural systems. But as we look at making sure that the whole segment and the whole sphere of the operations increase their funding, this is also a very important part to it. In about 1998, OTA commissioned an economic study from the University of Central Oklahoma. That was a real high level study. It was more of looking at the number of times a dollar circulates through the economy and things of that nature. But that was the last time that we really in Oklahoma looked at the economic benefit of public transit. Also in 2003, OTA worked with ODOT to do a needs assessment of public transit in the state. That 2003 needs assessment study is really what led to the funding levels that we see today, the $5.7 million funding levels that we see today that have basically remained stagnant for a 15-year period. Another goal of that 2003 transit study was to create a dedicated funding source. And of course, we know that that didn't happen coming out of the 2003 study because we still to this day don't have the dedicated funding source. It's time to update both of those research projects. And so we have commissioned 2 research projects that are ongoing right now. The first one is the economic benefit of public transit, and that's going to be analyzed at the community level as well as the state level. That's being conducted by the business school at Oklahoma State. It's costing us $25,000 to do that study. And that study is going to be completed by the end of the year, by December the 31st. This is going to be the economic foundation that we will be able to use as a tool to proceed for the increase in the state funding. We know in the state of Oklahoma that economic growth and economic data is one of the most important things that our state legislators look at in making their determinations as far as funding goes. I know one of the things that I have started talking about recently is public transit is really an economic growth type of project. It just happens to have some social benefit to it, but it's really about economic growth because there's only two reasons that people ride the bus. They ride the bus to make money, and they ride the bus to spend money. And that economic benefit's got to be captured so that we have a message that we can take to the state legislators about what we serve to the individual communities and the state as a whole. This study is going to give us the hard data to be able to do that. The second study is the updated version of that 2003 needs assessment. And so we're going to update that. It'll be an accurate assessment of what the transit needs in the state of Oklahoma are. It's going to be at the local level as well as at the state level again. So we will go down to the local level, showing what the real transit needs across the state are. That's being conducted by the Small Urban and Rural Transit Center out of North Dakota State University. That project is costing us $50,000, and that is going to be completed by the end of January. We will have a summary of that research done by the 15th of January with the detailed finalization report by January the 31st. Those two studies are the foundation for this campaign and the things that we will continue to talk about in today's presentation. So what are we currently doing to prepare for the 2019 legislative session? Well, we are meeting with select state lawmakers, some of those who maybe are friends or who may be able to be champions. There is a House interim study on the United We Ride program. United We Ride is a governor's council that has frankly not done a whole lot in the past, and Representative Carol Bush, that represents the 70th district, which is actually Midtown Tulsa. She has put together the interim study on United We Ride. That hearing is going to be September the 18th. The important thing is that this is going to give us an opportunity to sit before the House Transportation Committee and talk about more than just United We Ride. It's going to give us the opportunity to talk about the transit needs in general, to tell the House Transportation Committee what we're working on and what we're going to have for them before the legislative session starts. I do know that Representative Bush's interest goes beyond United We Ride. Actually, tomorrow, Ted Reek from Tulsa Transit, who is, of course, our chairman of our advocacy committee, he and I are having a meeting with her tomorrow. We're going to be going over a number of things with her, including some look at the Veterans Ride Connect and the one call system under the Veterans Ride Connect, because one of the parts of United We Ride is the one call system. She's also asked for information about better coordination between state agencies, particularly as it relates to healthcare, transportation, and things of that nature. So we've got a real opportunity from this House interim study to take what we're working on and start working that into our champions and our leaders in the legislature as the process is going forward. We also are briefing the gubernatorial candidates on what we are doing. and getting a feel for where these candidates stand on public transit. We met last Tuesday with two of the candidates. We met with former Attorney General Drew Edmondson, who is the Democratic candidate for governor. That was a very good meeting. He was very supportive of public transit and was very strong in his commitment to seeing an increase in funding for transit if he were elected governor. His joking comment was that if the study wasn't done until the January the 31st, he'd have to write in pencil to his state of the state how much money needed to go to public transit. He is also looking beyond that as to rural hospitals and broadband internet and things of that nature to rural areas. He sees it as a whole package. The other candidate that we met with last Tuesday was Kevin Stitt. He is one of the two remaining Republicans for running for governor. He is a businessman out of Tulsa. He is from the mortgage industry. I was quite impressed with Mr. Stitt. I thought that he made a great presentation. He asked really good questions about transit and really gave an indication of if he were elected, he would have a strong desire to involve those of us in the industry to look at changes and additional funding and things of that nature. The other Republican candidate, former Oklahoma City Mayor Mick Cornett, in a conversation with his campaign manager, they declined to have a meeting with OTA. The reason for declining that meeting was at this time they would only meet with people who were having fundraisers for them. And so there was no meeting, and I don't expect there to be a meeting with Mr. Cornett. But you can see that we're going from the legislative branch and also to the executive branch in preparing these people for what we'll bring forward in the 2019 legislative session. As far as our membership goes, you, of course, are the last day of our briefings. The board finalized everything on this on the 27th of July. We had a webinar last week and today's webinar to see that all of our membership understands the campaign and understands your role in the campaign to make this successful. This will also be a major highlight at the October conference in Norman. Tuesday night, of course, is that old early bird reception where people on the board and a few others who came in the night before just got together kind of to see one another as before the conference kicked off and just have a little bit of fun. It's more of a formal one this time. It will be the Transit OK Vision 2020 reception. And in fact, it's partially hosted by the Norman Chamber of Commerce. And we're very excited to have their involvement. And so that'll kick off with that early bird reception. The opening general session on the Wednesday, the 17th of October, will be a panel presentation on the political landscape as it relates to transit funding. It will involve Scott Borgen of CTAA, Kristen Joyner from SWATA, Representative Colin Walkie of the Oklahoma City metro area, and it will also have a mayor. We have invited David Holt so that we have the perspective from the national level, the regional level, the legislative branch at the state level, and local perspective from a mayor. That panel will be moderated by former State Senator A.J. Griffin, who is now the head of government relations for PACOM. So that's going to be a very good panel, helping everybody get a good feel for what the political landscape is for the transit industry. And then on Friday during the OTA Square session, there will be a panel discussion of the campaign of where it's at that point. We'll have the head researchers from Oklahoma State and North Dakota State will be making presentations on where those projects are, and also the folks who are in charge of the pieces, the local community alliances. That portion is being headed up by Kendra McGady from Pelivan. She'll be part of that panel discussion. and the Faces of Transit portion of the campaign is being headed by Melissa Fessler from First Capital Trolley, and she'll be on that panel as well. We'll be talking about those two segments as we go through today. Of course, as we get towards the end of this year, we'll be working with our state legislative champions to draft the legislation that will be the basis for moving forward next year with increased state funding. Bills have to be introduced in the state legislature by middle of December. I think it's around the 14th of December is the deadline for those introductions. And so those bills will be drafted. They'll be introduced in mid-December. And of course, working with our champions in the legislature, there'll be at that point a legislative plan and schedule on how we will proceed once we get into 2019. So that is the foundation. That's the beginning. That's where we're at today and where we are approaching some of these things as we look over the next 30 to 60 days. The next piece that we're going to go into is the first part of where you come into play in making sure that we're successful in this campaign. And that's the formation of community alliances to support public transit, specifically for this project to support the increased funding from the state level for public transit. Now, community alliances are not just there for you on this one particular thing. Take, for example, in Oklahoma City, they have a community alliance that has been in place for quite a while now. They actually have academies where those people go and spend 3 or 4 nights learning the depths of transit. And they even turned to that group a couple of weeks ago. They had a meeting to talk about what MAPS 4 should include as it relates to transportation. So community alliances over the long term are things that can be very beneficial to you in supporting your agency. And so there'll be a long-term benefit to your community alliance beyond what we're going to be wanting to use them for in the short term as it relates to this funding. So we will give to you, and it will come out to you tomorrow, we will give to you the tools that you'll need to develop your community alliances in each of your communities. Your alliances should include at least 5 people. And when you start thinking about this, you're already going to know who these people are. They may be system users. They could be businessmen. They may be service organizations, elected officials. You may have people from your staff that are on these. They're the people who your system impact on a daily basis, whether it's the businessman who has people coming to their place of business through your system. It could be the people from the senior center where you're hauling seniors to for meals or things of that nature. And again, when you start thinking of these folks, they are very apparent to you on who they're going to be. Those of you who serve more than one community, you're going to need to think about what your alliance looks like. And some folks that serve more than one community are going to have one alliance that covers the entire service area. So they may have someone from the chamber in one community, somebody from a senior center in a different community, and so on. Now, if you have that type of an alliance that covers multiple areas, you're likely going to have a larger alliance than if it were just in one community. Now, others who service multiple communities are going to have an alliance in each of those communities. So maybe one in community A, and then another alliance in community B, and the third alliance in community C is the third area that is serviced. It's completely up to you which direction you want to go and how you want to put those together, but your alliances will represent that thought process that you have on how you put that together. And everybody's alliance is going to look different. The alliance in Altus is going to look different than the alliance in Enid, and that's going to look different than the alliance in Tulsa. And so everybody's alliance is going to look different. and it really is going to reflect the makeup of your communities that you serve and those people who benefit from the service provided. Initially, we're going to teach those alliances 3 things. The first thing is we're going to teach them about transit. And that teaching is going to come from you because we want them to learn about transit from the perspective of their local agency. We don't want that to just be here's what transit looks like from a national level, blah, 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 blah. We want them to understand what your agency is and what transit is as it's performed by your agency. We at OTA are going to then help in teaching them the importance of advocacy and how to advocate. One of the things that many of you told me as I was meeting with you over the last few months is OTA always said, oh, it's important that we talk to our lawmakers and that we tell them what we want, but we've never had a real understanding of why that's important and really how to do it. And so in our initial work with the alliances, you'll play the role of teaching about transit. We'll play the role of teaching about advocacy. And importantly, in this initial work over the next 6 to 12 months, those community alliances will be important for our actions to advocate for the goals of this campaign of increasing that state funding. Now, as I said, tomorrow you will receive an email that will talk about 2 things. The first thing that we'll talk about is the formation of your community alliance. And that's going to, again, provide those tools for you on how to create that alliance, some of the people that you should look at, things that you should keep in mind as you start identifying the people who are going to serve on that community alliance of yours and that you're going to go ask to do that. Your initial alliances should be formed and their contact information provided back to us at OTA by October the 1st. You're going to see some time deadlines in here, and where these time deadlines come from is how we can be prepared for the legislature when it meets in February to be able to proceed with that action. So just an example, there's going to be a document that's attached to that email. It's about a 17, 18-page document. It comes from APTA. It's a very, very good document about forming your alliances. And that's going to be attached to that email so that you have that, read through it, study it, know the advice that it's giving you in putting that together. You'll see that it has a list of people that you might involve. It might be hard to see on the screen, but this is not an exhaustive list, but a list that they've provided and put together of people that you might want to think about who they represent in bringing that together in your alliance. One of the things that I found interesting in this document, they have little boxes like the box down here on the bottom of this one. Again, probably hard to see on the screen, but it talks about the Kentucky Public Transit Association and Kentuckians for Better Transportation in Louisville, Kentucky. What caught my attention is here is a case example of success from a program just like the one we're getting ready to implement. And this particular one meant $8.5 million just for Louisville, Kentucky. So I point that out because this type of an approach works. It's worked in other places in transportation, and with our teamwork and our joint effort in making all of this work, it'll work here in increased funding as well. There's even a checklist in this document that you'll be getting that just kind of reminds you, hey, did you think about this? Did you think about that? That you'll see. So that's just some screenshots of a couple of the pages of one of those tools that you're going to be receiving in that email tomorrow morning. Now, as we talked about the education of that alliance, the first meeting of the Alliance will be to do that 3-part training that I mentioned just a little bit earlier, where you're going to teach them about transit from your agency's perspective, and we're going to teach them about advocacy and how to advocate. And we're going to dovetail the timing of these activities along with our Faces of Transit interviews, which I'm going to talk about in the next segment of this. But what that means is that we're looking at holding that initial Alliance meeting. It's going to be a couple hours long, an hour for you to talk about transit, an hour for us to talk about advocacy, and we'll be putting those together with you for the time frame of October the 23rd through December the 14th. And again, this is where we're going to focus on you teaching about transit and us teaching about advocacy. We're going to have our materials prepared by October the 1st on those materials that we're going to provide and the way we're going to teach on those other 2 parts. I'm going to show you a video right now, and I show you this video to give you an idea of the things that we're going to be teaching. I'm actually waiting on a $10,000 grant, hopefully from APTA, that will help us create some of our preparation. But this video is very old. It's from about 1989 or 90. You'll laugh when you see the computer in this video. You'll, of course, laugh at the very handsome individual at the beginning who has a trench coat on. Remember, in the 90s, trench coats was what reporters wore. And so no laughing at the trench coat. And the third thing is there'll be a prize for the person who tells me why this video should remind you of the Love Boat. But the key is, this is the type of thing we're going to be teaching the folks when we come out there. There is a segment of this video that talks about a pack. We will not be talking about packs when we come out because OTA doesn't have a pack. So you can just ignore that. That's not a piece of what we will be doing when we come out to do that teaching.
I'm Merle McCann, a soybean farmer from Virginia and one of the leaders of the American Soybean Association. The American Soybean Association is run by farmers. Soybean farmers make the decisions for programs and policy that affect our profits. Grassroots action is vital to our success.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm James Lee Adams. I'm volunteer president of the American Soybean Association. I farm in the 2nd Congressional District of Georgia, and it's a pleasure to be with you here today. I'd like to begin the discussion of this 1990 Farm Bill from a farmer's perspective, a soybean farmer's perspective, and tell you roughly what we've done in the last few years. We have specific recommendations in the written testimony.
This is Washington. You see it every night on the news. But if you're like most people that don't live here, you get the feeling that what happens here has little to do with you, that laws are made by a handful of politicians. I'm Mark Neslin. I live and work here. And yes, sometimes the laws are made by a few individuals. But there's only one reason for that. It's because the average citizen doesn't realize how much impact they can have on this process of making laws. Sure, you can vote and send your representatives to Washington, but your job's not over there. Not when it comes to making the laws that affect you and your farming operation. First, you need to stay current. Laws on subjects that seem to be completely unrelated to soybean farming can in fact have a profound effect on your pocketbook. Of course, that's one reason you belong to the American Soybean Association, to stay on top of things and organize a response to help soybean farmers. Remember the 1980 embargo, when export contracts to the Soviets were canceled? The American Soybean Association developed the concept of export contract sanctity to protect soybean exports from embargoes, and we made it into law. How? Grassroots support. We were able to show the members of Congress that contract sanctity was what the folks back home wanted. That was the key then, and that's the key now.
Hi, Bob. It's Nancy Foster calling you from the Soybean Association. Did you get the information I sent you the other day about federal funding for soybean research?
Sure did. I've got it right here. It's particularly timely, too, since we're about to begin the appropriations process in Congress.
Well, there are two things that are really important in federal funding for soybean research. Soybean farmers need additional production research, as well as research into new uses for soybeans to increase demand. When you increase demand, you're going to increase profits for farmers.
Senator Fowler agrees with ASA's position on soybean research funding. Nancy, we've heard from all over Georgia with regard to soybean research. We've had calls and letters all requesting more money in this area.
And that's the key. The letters, the phone calls, and the personal trips to Washington for a face-to-face with your elected representatives and their staffs.
Well, that is the probably, along with my town meetings, single greatest input I get. I would say this: letters from constituents, phone calls from constituents, meetings from constituents are very important. They are more important than orchestrated letter campaigns with little postcards that say vote against this or vote for that. Those are the kinds of things that can be arranged, organized, and funded by groups outside of the state. But when somebody writes me a letter on gun control or flexibility for soybeans, let's say, and I know that person is a producer out in my district, that's the person I want to talk to. That's the person that's going to be influenced by the program. So really, that is much more significant in terms of me basing a decision than, let's say, a professional lobbyist who comes in to talk to me, or conversations with colleagues, or any kind of argument I might read in the media. The constituent comes first.
Grassroots. It works. But how does it work? For one thing, it works because only about 1 of 10 Americans actually write their representatives or senators. Ask them why, and they say Washington is in the grip of special interests, that representatives and senators are too busy to read their mail. But that's not true. You can get action in Washington with a letter or phone call, even more with a personal visit. However, you need to understand how it works. Staff assistants go through the mail every day and determine what is important and advise the lawmaker. What works? Your letter, on your letterhead, short and to the point. It deals with just one issue. You make your point and resist the temptation to comment on other issues that are not related. Now here's a letter that obviously needs to be read by the lawmaker, and the aide is more inclined to pass it along to be read and responded to. A personal visit to your lawmaker is very powerful. Even very busy representatives and senators will take the time to see you, their constituent, but be sure to set up the visit well in advance. Your association can help you here.
American Soybean Association, we will be, of course, having to get this together with the Senate bill, and we might need your help to be sure that we get some of the good provisions that are on the House side of the package.
You can certainly count on that, and I would ask that you and other members of your organization stay in touch with us, and if you have any other concerns, and because we're always glad to hear from you.
We certainly appreciate it.
It works. Grassroots effort led to the smoking ban on airlines against powerful opposition. No matter how you feel about this issue, it proves that grassroots action works. And the National Federation of Independent Business says that repeal of some confusing tax legislation was all done through grassroots pressure. Business owners going to Congress saying, "We've got a real problem." The National Rifle Association is a classic example of the effectiveness of teamwork between the association and its members. What makes the difference? People who are passionately involved.
When I say lobbied, I've been contacted by producers all over the country expressing concern. Therefore, it seems a very appropriate role of this committee to schedule some hearings in which we allow those voices to have their say in front of this committee regarding potential changes in all checkoffs in order to make them work better.
Grassroots works, And it will work for the soybean farmer, because when you join your voice in a team effort to make your wishes known, you get action. You get policies that work for profits for you, the soybean farmer. Those of us in Washington work hard to educate lawmakers on a broad range of issues that affect agriculture. But what we hear over and over again from the lawmakers is that they need to hear from you. Your grassroots voice is a tangible asset that needs only to be joined in a coordinated effort to be effective. That's why we've developed a program called the Soy Action Network to coordinate our efforts to address legislation affecting soybean production and marketing. To date, we've focused on issues such as agriculture appropriations, soybean research, pesticide regulations, and the national soybean checkoff legislation. In that one, we impressed congressional members and staff with over 655 telegrams in 1 week. The Soy Action Network gets this kind of action because it helps spread information on issues that affect profitability. And when you have your facts straight, you make an impressive presentation when you write, call, or visit. There's another way to make your voice heard, and that's the time-honored way of helping those in Congress who support soybeans. It's by contributing to the campaigns of lawmakers you believe will vote in your best interests on issues that are important to you. One effective way to do that is through your Political Action Committee.
The benefits that soybean farmers and farmers everywhere get from contributing to their particular PAC, I think could be stated that, first of all, it shows a very serious interest in their government and how it operates, and insofar as the questions relating to their particular type of production are concerned. And I don't think that there's an agricultural product that isn't concerned by something that we do in government.
In the case of ASA members, our Political Action Committee is called SoyPAC.
SoyPAC is young, but we're already making a difference when it comes to getting lawmakers elected who are sensitive to the needs of soybean farmers. And SoyPAC will continue to be a rousing success as long as soybean farmers support it. When you combine grassroots support and a strong political action committee, you've got an unbeatable combination.
When I'm approached by a representative of a PAC, particularly an agriculturally oriented PAC, I respond with great interest, because this means to me that this agricultural production group has an interest in backing up their concerns about the type of productivity they have and the government involvement with that particular commodity, to the point that they're willing to contribute their money, which is hard enough to earn these days in agriculture, and that they also understand how this process works. So though I may not have any expertise or direct knowledge about that type of production, it piques my interest, because it means that agriculture is actually doing its best.
What does it all come down to? You and the facts.
Fact. Washington is no longer a town where a few people run the government. Fact. Representatives and senators were elected to serve their constituents, and they know it. Fact. Only 1 out of 10 Americans writes or contacts their lawmakers. A great opportunity to cut through the clutter of mass PR campaigns with your voice. Fact. Grassroots is a team effort. The American Soybean Association represents your concerns, and you add credibility to what it says. We keep you informed about the issues that matter, give you names and addresses to write, numbers to call, even help arrange visits with your lawmakers. But the rest is up to you. Just remember, your participation is far from over when you vote. It's just beginning. Raise your voice in a team effort. You will be heard, and you will contribute to the process of making soybean farmers more productive and more profitable, because grassroots works.
So again, that gives you an idea of the types of ways we're going to teach, the things we're going to be teaching. We're pulling together a number of different pieces to go down that kind of path. So just to make sure somebody is still awake out there, who can identify why you thought of the Love Boat when you saw that video? Anybody? Well, you're all too young. Representative Fred Grandy from Iowa, before he was a member of the House of Representatives, was Gopher on the Love Boat. So I know Taylor's too young to remember that. All right, so the community alliances will come back together in the January and February timeframe once we get our results from our research. And at that time, we will brief those alliances on the results of the research, what it shows us, what it tells us, and what we'll be doing with those results, and what the legislative plan looks like that's been developed with our champions in the legislature. We may even want to involve the Faces of Transit participants in your local area when we do those briefings in that time frame. And we want to take advantage of that time to also share that information with others in your community. Maybe the local media, the local newspaper, maybe the local Rotary, or something of that nature. But we want to use that opportunity when we're back out there in the field doing that second round of teaching based off the results, to make sure the community see those positive things that we have learned from that research as well. Now, at the same time that you're working with us on developing your local alliance, OTA is going to be creating a statewide steering committee for the campaign. And that steering committee is going to look a lot like your local alliances, just on the state level. They'll have business leaders, healthcare leaders, labor leaders, school officials, folks from the environmental community, maybe even a couple of the representatives from the local alliances. And so it'll look very similar, but it'll be at the state level, and it's going to be working to support the passage of the legislation to achieve these goals, and developing plans to work through that 2019 session. That committee, just like your local alliances, will be formed by the 1st of October. We're going to be educating them on a statewide basis about transit, and they will likely be some of the folks that we'll see at that October 16th reception at our conference. And as I said earlier, that committee will be developing a lot of the plans along with our legislative lawmakers to work on that passage. Now I'm going to switch gears to the second piece. We just talked about the community alliances. Now we're going to talk about Faces of Transit. Early in the presentation, I talked about how we need to have economic data of the importance of public transit to the communities and to the state as a whole. And that's a very important message that we need to deliver, and we need to have the facts to be able to deliver. But there is a corresponding tale on the other side, and that's the human nature story of what we do. Who are the users of our systems? And we need to tell the story of those people who use our system and what that means to them from a personal perspective. And that's where we're going to be creating the Faces of Transit. And our Faces of Transit are going to identify those people who ride our systems. So we're asking that you identify a user on your system in each of the following categories: work, health, social, shopping, and education. So somebody who rides the bus to go to work, somebody who rides the bus for medical appointments, somebody who rides the bus just for social need, somebody who goes shopping, somebody who goes to school. And again, if you're a provider that has multiple communities, in this case, we're wanting to try to identify that pool of people in each of the communities that you serve. There's another person out there that we want to tell the story of, and sometimes we forget about, and that's people who work for you, your agency staff. whether they're a driver, a mechanic, a dispatcher, they have a very important story to tell about what transit means to them as well. And we will be developing a story card for each of these participants and a video clip that's about 30 seconds long on each of these individuals. And again, think beyond this campaign, what a powerful tool each of you are going to have in your hand of video, 30-second video clips of people who ride your system and why it benefits them. One person said, I'm going to the local little movie theater and I'm going to put some of that on those commercials that run before the movie because I've got an audience that is captivated at that point that I can tell the story to. As a matter of fact, that concept was used by the Denton, Texas Public Transportation Agency along with a film festival. It's won some big award in marketing for the way they use that type of thing there. So there'll be other benefits that you'll be able to get out of using those clips as well. We will have a web page that will talk about these faces of transit and will feature each of these in a rotating fashion. That email that I'm sending you tomorrow, I told you that the first part of that email would talk about the alliances. The second part of that email talks about selecting your individuals in the faces of transit. And we're just like the alliances, we're going to ask that these faces of transit participants be identified by October the 1st, and that you have that identification and their contact information provided back to us. Also in that email tomorrow, there will be an initial questionnaire and a release. There'll be two questionnaires, one questionnaire geared for the user, one questionnaire geared for an employee. And so once you identify those people, you will ask them to fill out that little 2-page questionnaire and send that back to us by October the 1st so that we can prepare for the coming out and doing the videotaping of them. And also send back that release for the use of their image and name and those type of things. These are just, again, a screenshot of the first page of the 2-page questionnaire. You can see it says, tell me about your family, tell me about yourself, why do you ride the bus, etc., and so forth. This is the first page of the 2-page questionnaire for an employee. Again, tell me about your family and yourself, explain your job, how long have you been there, did you work elsewhere? And again, both of those are 2 pages long, and then there will be the release for each of those folks to sign. We'll come out and do the videotaping, conducting those interviews on tape with those faces of transit folks, and we'll be doing that in that October 23rd through December the 14th time frame. That will coincide with your alliance meeting. So if your alliance meeting is the night of October the 27th, then I'm probably going to be out there and do the interviews of your faces of transit during the day on October the 27th, and then we'll have your alliance meeting that night. These stories will be written and the videos will be edited all during this process. We'll have all of that completed by the December the 31st, and all of that will be up online by January the 15th. So you can now see how this all plays together. Having this work done at the same time that we've got all of our research completed and that we're ready for a legislative session that starts in February of 2019. So what will happen is those research results, the community alliances, the faces of transit, that's all going to be the mix. That's all part of this campaign that allows us to present to lawmakers and public through a variety of channels and legislative briefings in your communities with your alliances, through community presentations, again, whether that's the Rotary or the media or whoever that may be. That will all come together to share all of that information to lead us down that path of that increased funding. We will have a public transit day at the Capitol. This will likely be in March, and it will be that, no, we're not going to be picketing in front of the Capitol with signs. We're going to be inside the rotunda Each agency will have a table. You'll be able to showcase your agency. We'll have created the boards that have some of your faces of transit around that area. This is showing that impact to the members of the legislature. This is that putting 100 to 150 people in the rotunda of the Capitol so that they say, wow, people do care about transit. They're here showing us that. And we're going to ask you to bring your community alliances along with you, bring along your faces of transit. And the easiest way to get all those people to the Capitol is to put them on a bus and drive them there. Because now what has happened is now we have a visual impact at the Capitol, outside of the Capitol as well, because now we've got the buses of our systems from across the state there at the Capitol. And in fact, we'll probably do something to where for the members to get their lunch, they'll have to go out and see those buses and maybe talk to you at the buses or that type of thing, and that's where their lunch will be served to them from that perspective. So in summary, the Transit OK Vision 2020 campaign is going to use that research and use these campaign tools to successfully pass legislation that meets the goals of OTA, which is that thing that you have told us. We need more money. Increase state funding for public transit. Ensure that it's provided to all of the segments, urban, small urban, rural, and tribal. Ensure a dedicated funding source, and also provide legislation that allows you to look at other matters at your local levels when you want to create additional funding. So that is the campaign. I would be happy to answer any questions or any discussion that any of you would like to have. And I did see the message from Tina that says she knew the Fred Grandy answer, so she wins the prize. I just don't know what the prize is, Tina. Questions or comments that any of you have? Well, if you have some and you're going to get this presentation also so that you will be able to review it to keep you in your thought process and helping you along. So if you have questions as you think about this, there's a lot of information here that you've got to digest. If you have questions once you receive that email, please don't hesitate. Pick up the phone, shoot me an email, whatever you need to help you in this process. I'll be reaching out to you individually as well to make sure that things are coming along with all of the pieces that we put together from that perspective. So with that, thank you everybody for being on today, and watch for your emails tomorrow that start that next step in the process of forming those alliances and identifying the transit faces of transit folks. Thanks a lot. Have a good rest of your day.